Jake Reeves had perfected the art of mediocrity. For 3 years aboard the Asterisk cosmic hauler Asterisk, he'd maintained his reputation as the maintenance tech who could fix a leaky pipe, but somehow always crossed the wrong wires when dealing with anything more complex than a coffee dispenser. It was a delicate balance, appear competent enough to keep his job, incompetent enough that nobody expected miracles. Reeves, Chief Engineer Kowalski's voice echoed through the cramped corridor. The recycling unit in Section C is making that noise again. Jake grabbed his toolkit, making sure to rattle it loudly. On my way, Chief. Probably just needs a good whack with the multi-spanner. He shuffled toward Section C, deliberately taking the longest route. The recycling unit's harmonic resonance was actually due to a misaligned quantum fluctuation dampener, a 5-minute fix if you knew what you were doing. Jake planned to spend 2 hours troubleshooting before accidentally bumping the right component. The ship suddenly lurched, throwing Jake against the bulkhead. Emergency klaxons wailed as red lights bathed the corridors in hellish crimson. Jake's toolkit scattered across the deck plating. All hands to emergency stations. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom. Unknown vessel approaching off the starboard bow. Repeat, unknown vessel approaching. Jake scrambled to collect his tools, muttering curses. Through the porthole, he glimpsed something that made his blood freeze. The approaching ship was massive, easily 10 times the Asterisk cosmic hauler's Asterisk size, and its hull seemed to shimmer with an oily rainbow sheen that hurt to look at directly. "Sweet mother of Newton," he whispered. The ship shuddered again as some invisible force gripped the hull. Jake felt the familiar tingle of his skin that meant they were caught in a tractor beam, though this one felt different, more sophisticated than the crude gravitational manipulators most ships used. He made his way to the engine bay, partly from habit and partly because he suspected they'd need all hands working on whatever was about to go wrong. He found Chief Kowalski staring at a bank of dead monitors, his face pale as recycled air. "It's the quantum resonance chambers," Kowalski said without looking up. "Something hit us with an energy pulse that destabilized the entire matrix. We're running on backup fusion only." Jake glanced at the readings over Kowalski's shoulder. The exotic matter containment fields were fluctuating wildly. The quantum tunneling arrays had shut down entirely, and the subspace manifold was showing dangerous instabilities. Without the resonance chambers, they had no faster-than-light capability, no long-range communications, and maybe 6 hours of life support. "Can we fix it?" Jake asked, trying to inject the right note of helpless confusion into his voice. "Fix it?" Kowalski laughed hysterically. "Reeves, this isn't a clogged drain. This is quantum engineering. The matrix alignment alone requires a Ph.D. in theoretical physics and 3 years of specialized training. The best we can do is send a distress signal and hope somebody friendly finds us before our air runs out." Jake nodded sympathetically, while his mind automatically cataloged solutions. A phase conjugate feedback loop would restabilize the containment fields. Rerouting power through the auxiliary quantum tunnels could bypass the damaged arrays. The manifold instabilities were actually straightforward, just a matter of recalibrating the dimensional variance compensators. I'll go check on the backup generators," Jake said. "Make sure they're running smoothly." "Yeah, you do that," Kowalski muttered, already reaching for the emergency bourbon he kept hidden behind the tool locker. Jake waited until he was alone in the lower engineering section before allowing his facade to slip. Moving with sudden purpose and precision, he opened access panels and began rerouting power conduits. His hands moved without conscious thought, muscle memory, guiding him through procedures he'd memorized years ago but never dared to use. The quantum resonance chambers were elegant devices, really. Most engineers treated them like black boxes. Input energy here, get faster-than-light travel there. But Jake understood the underlying principles, the delicate dance of particles and probability that made it all work. He bypassed the damaged primary controllers and jury-rigged a manual feedback system using spare parts from 3 different repair kits. Within 30 minutes, he had partial power restored to the resonance chambers. Not enough for FTL travel, but sufficient to run life support indefinitely and maybe send a coherent subspace message. He was just finishing the calibration when footsteps echoed in the corridor above. Jake quickly scattered tools around the work area and grabbed a hydrospanner, pretending to tighten random bolts. The footsteps belonged to Kowalski, who stumbled down the ladder looking like he'd made friends with that emergency bourbon. Reeves, what the hell? Kowalski stared at the status board, where green lights had replaced most of the angry red ones. How is the quantum resonance matrix showing stable? Is it? Jake looked up from his fake repair work, adopting his best confused expression. Huh, maybe that energy pulse thing wasn't as bad as we thought. I mean, I was just checking the backup generators like you said, and I heard some clicking noises, so I tightened a few things. You tightened a few things, Kowalski repeated slowly. Well, yeah, that's usually what works, right? When something's making noise, you tighten the loose bits. Kowalski moved to the main control console and ran a full diagnostic. His face went from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. Reeves, according to this readout, someone performed a complete quantum matrix recalibration using jury-rigged components and... Is this a phase conjugate feedback loop? What now? Jake tilted his head like a puzzled dog. This is impossible, the math alone. Kowalski trailed off, then grabbed Jake by the shoulders. Did anyone else come down here? Did you see anyone working on these systems? Just me, Chief, but I was only tightening things, honest. Maybe the ship's computer fixed itself. Before Kowalski could respond, the ship shuddered again. But this time, it wasn't from external forces. Something was materializing directly on the main deck. Jake recognized the distinctive harmonic frequency of quantum teleportation, though this version was far more sophisticated than anything in human space. The intercom crackled to life. All crew to the main cargo bay, our visitors wish to speak with us. Jake and Kowalski exchanged glances. Visitors, Kowalski squeaked. They climbed to the main deck to find the entire crew assembled in the cargo bay, staring at 5 figures who definitely weren't human. 4 of them wore flowing robes that seemed to be cut from starlight itself, shifting between colors that had no names. The 5th figure stood at their center, a woman whose beauty was almost painful to behold, with skin like polished ivory and hair that moved as if underwater. The only thing that marked her as definitively non-human was a pair of elegantly pointed ears that rose several inches above where human ears should be. She was studying a handheld device that pulsed with the same rainbow sheen as their ship, and her expression was one of intense curiosity mixed with something that might have been amusement. "Greetings," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Jake's bones. "I am Queen Zarathil of the Ethereal Dominion. We detected some rather interesting quantum fluctuations from your vessel and decided to investigate." Captain Morrison stepped forward, trying to project authority despite the fact that he was clearly terrified. "Your Majesty, we're just a simple freight hauler. We don't have anything of value to—" "Oh, but you do," the Queen interrupted, her ears twitching slightly. Her device chimed softly, and she looked directly at Jake with eyes the color of deep space. "Tell me, which of you performed the quantum matrix recalibration I'm detecting?" The crew turned to stare at Jake, who suddenly found breathing difficult. What's a quantum matrix?" he managed. Queen Zarathil's smile was radiant and terrifying. How wonderfully modest. Queen Zarathil's device continued its soft chiming as she approached Jake, who was seriously considering whether diving behind the nearest cargo container would be undignified or merely pathetic. Her pointed ears twitched with each electronic note, like some cosmic antenna fine-tuned to his mounting panic. "Your quantum resonance repair," she said, holding up the device so its holographic display projected between them, "utilized a phase conjugate feedback loop that my own engineers have been attempting to perfect for 17 standard cycles. The mathematical elegance is quite remarkable." Jake stared at the swirling equations floating in the air, recognizing his own work translated into alien symbols that somehow made perfect sense to his brain. "Oh, that. Yeah, I just, tightened some things, maybe used a little duct tape." One of the Queen's robed companions, a tall figure whose hood couldn't quite hide his own pointed ears, let out what might have been a snort. "Duct tape," he repeated in a voice dry as vacuum. "Of course, the universal repair solution. It's very versatile stuff," Jake said desperately. "Fixes everything: leaky pipes, broken hearts, quantum matrix destabilization." "Quantum matrix destabilization," the advisor echoed, his tone suggesting he was taking mental notes for future entertainment. Queen Zarathil stepped closer, her device now displaying a 3-dimensional reconstruction of Jake's improvised repairs. "Tell me, Jake Reeves. Yes, I scanned your identification. How exactly does one tighten a dimensional variance compensator?" Very carefully, Jake offered. Behind him, he could hear Chief Kowalski making strangled noises. Look, Your Majesty, I think you're overestimating my abilities here. I'm just a maintenance guy. I fix leaky faucets and replace burned-out light panels. Sometimes I get lucky with the bigger stuff, but that's all it is. Luck. Luck, she mused, her ears tilting forward with interest. Would you call this luck as well? She gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show energy readings from the ship's sensors. You're lucky. Repair work is currently broadcasting a quantum signature that shouldn't be possible with your species' technology level. In fact, it's solving a harmonic resonance problem that has stumped our greatest minds. Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead. Maybe your greatest minds need better tools? I mean, no offense, but have they tried percussive maintenance? Sometimes you just need to give things a good whack. The advisor, who Jake was beginning to think of as Mr. Sarcasm, cleared his throat. Ah yes, percussive maintenance, the time-honored technique of hitting complex quantum devices until they work properly. It's more nuanced than it sounds, Jake protested. You have to hit them in the right spot with the right amount of force at the right phase of the quantum cycle. He stopped talking when he realized everyone was staring at him. Even the Queen's eyebrows had climbed toward her hairline. The right phase of the quantum cycle, she repeated slowly. Did I say that? I meant to say you hit them when they're making funny noises. Captain Morrison chose that moment to find his voice. Your Majesty, I assure you that Maintenance Technician Reeves is exactly what he appears to be, a simple repairman. His personnel file shows no advanced education, no specialized training. He's been with us for 3 years and his work has been adequate. Adequate, Queen Zarathel mused. Yes, I can see how solving quantum engineering problems that have puzzled civilizations for millennia might be considered adequate. Jake's crewmates were now looking at him with expressions ranging from bewilderment to outright betrayal. Sarah from Communications was shaking her head in disbelief. You mean all those times I asked you to look at the subspace transceiver alignment issues, and you said it was above your pay grade? It was above my pay grade, Jake said quickly. Still is. I just got lucky with the engine thing because, the Queen prompted. Because I watched a really good instructional video once. Mr. Sarcasm actually chuckled at that one. An instructional video on quantum matrix recalibration. How thorough of you. Look, this is all a big misunderstanding, Jake said, backing away from the group. I'm going to go back to the engine room and, make sure everything's still tightened properly. Your Majesty, it's been a pleasure meeting you, but I really should get back to work. He turned to flee and promptly collided with a cargo container that definitely hadn't been there 3 years ago. The impact sent him stumbling sideways into what the manifest listed as decorative artifact, origin unknown, probably worthless. The moment his hand touched the crystalline surface, the artifact blazed to life with patterns of light that seemed to reach directly into his optic nerve. Jake snatched his hand back, but it was too late. The crystal continued pulsing, and somehow Jake knew with absolute certainty, that it was a quantum consciousness interface, designed to translate thought patterns across species barriers, currently calibrating itself to his neural frequency and broadcasting his actual knowledge level to anyone with the right sensors. Oh, come on, he muttered. Seriously. Queen Zarathel's device was now chiming frantically, its display showing readings that made her eyes widen. Fascinating. The artifact is responding to your neural patterns, displaying a knowledge base that spans theoretical physics, quantum engineering, and... Is that xenobiological mathematics? It's probably just reflecting my high school education, Jake said weakly. I got good grades in shop class. Shop class, Mr. Sarcasm repeated, where they taught xenobiological mathematics. Advanced shop class. The Queen stepped forward, and Jake found himself trapped between her penetrating gaze and the now dormant, but somehow smug-feeling alien artifact. Jake Reeves, she said formally, I hereby declare you to be my engineer. You're what now? My engineer. You will accompany me aboard the Starweaver and assist with certain technical challenges that have been frustrating my scientists. Oh no, Jake said quickly. No, I can't be your engineer. I don't know how to engineer things. I just hit them until they work. That's not engineering, that's assault with a deadly weapon. Assault on quantum mechanics, the advisor observed. How violent. Besides, Jake continued, I have responsibilities here. Important responsibilities. The recycling unit in Section C still makes that noise, and someone needs to keep an eye on the coffee dispenser and— The coffee dispenser, Queen Zarathil said gravely, will survive without your attention. You don't understand, Jake said desperately. These people need me. Who's going to perform mediocre repairs and provide a false sense of security about the ship's mechanical integrity? Who's going to give Chief Kowalski someone to blame when things go wrong? Chief Kowalski, who had been suspiciously quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Actually, Your Majesty, you can take him. I've got 17 years until retirement, and if I never see another one of his lucky accidents again, I'll die a happy man. Chief, Jake gasped. How can you say that? What about loyalty? What about friendship? What about the time I fixed the heating system in your quarters without being asked? You mean when you somehow rewired it to run more efficiently than the original manufacturer specifications? Yeah, that was real suspicious, Reeves. Jake turned to his other crewmates, hoping for support. Sarah shrugged. You did always seem to know more than you let on. Remember when you accidentally reconfigured the communication array to boost our signal strength by 300%? That was luck. Or when you stumbled across the solution to the water reclamation problem that had been bugging us for months, added Peters from navigation. I'm very clumsy. Queen Zarathil watched this exchange with obvious amusement. Jake had been aboard the Asterisk Starweaver for exactly 47 hours, and he'd already, accidentally, solved 3 engineering problems that Queen Zarathil's scientists had been wrestling with for decades. His new quarters were larger than his entire apartment back on Earth. The food tasted like it had been prepared by angels, and the view from his window showed nebulae that made him question everything he thought he knew about beauty. He was, in short, miserable. It's not that I'm ungrateful, he explained to the Queen's advisor, whose name turned out to be Kethvar, and whose sarcasm had only gotten more refined with extended exposure to Jake's situation. It's just that I was really looking forward to a nice, quiet career of fixing things that actually stayed fixed. How terribly disappointing for you, Kethvar replied, not looking up from his data pad. Instead, you're stuck improving technology for multiple civilizations and potentially preventing interstellar wars. The tragedy is overwhelming. They were walking through what Jake had been told was the diplomatic wing, though it looked more like someone had decided to build a palace inside a starship, and then gotten carried away with the decorating budget. Crystalline walls hummed with barely contained energy, and the floor seemed to be made of something that wasn't quite matter but definitely wasn't empty space either. Where exactly are we going? Jake asked, trying not to stare at a passing crew member whose idea of regulation uniform included what appeared to be liquid starlight woven into fabric. To meet our allies, Kethvar said with the tone of someone announcing a root canal appointment. The Forge Collective and the Void Singers have sent their finest representatives to observe your unique approach to problem-solving. My approach being hitting things until they work. Your approach being the systematic integration of incompatible technological paradigms through intuitive engineering solutions that shouldn't be possible. Jake stopped walking. That's a fancy way of saying I hit things until they work. If you insist on reducing quantum harmonics manipulation to percussive maintenance, yes. They entered a vast chamber that Jake's brain insisted was bigger on the inside than the outside, which was probably accurate given that this was alien architecture. 3 distinct groups occupied different sections of the room, and Jake could immediately tell which was which based on their approach to personal intimidation. The ethereal Dominion delegation, led by Queen Zarathil herself, favored the transcendently beautiful approach. They moved like dancers and spoke in harmonics that made ordinary conversation sound like aggressive barking. The Queen's ears twitched as she noticed Jake's arrival, and she gestured for him to join her. The Forge Collective had gone with industrialized menace as their aesthetic choice. Their representatives looked like someone had crossed a construction worker with a tank and then given the result advanced degrees in materials science. Their leader, a being who introduced himself as Forgemaster Durkin, had arms that could probably crush steel and a grip that definitely could when he shook Jake's hand. The Void Singers were the most unsettling, partly because they kept flickering in and out of visible existence, and partly because they hummed mathematical equations that made Jake's teeth itch. Their speaker, who went by the incomprehensible designation of Seven, seemed to communicate primarily through probability clouds and existential uncertainty. So, Jake said brightly, I hear you folks have been having some technical difficulties. Queen Zarathil gestured to a massive holographic display that materialized in the center of the room. It showed three completely different technological approaches to the same basic problem, creating a stable wormhole generator for instantaneous travel across galactic distances. Each of our species has developed a partial solution, she explained. The Dominion has mastered energy manipulation and dimensional folding. The collective has perfected the materials science necessary for containing exotic matter. The Singers have solved the quantum mathematics required for stable navigation. But separately, none of our approaches work, Forgemaster Durkin added, his voice like grinding gears. Combined, they should create a functional wormhole drive. In practice, they interfere with each other catastrophically. Seven contributed a sound that might have been agreement if agreement could be expressed as a mathematical proof. Jake was pretty sure they'd just explained the fundamental incompatibility using advanced probability theory, but it had sounded like a lullaby sung by reality itself. Right, Jake said, studying the holographic display. His mind automatically began cataloging the problems. Energy cascade feedback between the Dominion's dimensional manipulation and the collective's exotic matter containment. Quantum decoherence from the Singer's navigation protocols interfering with the other systems. In about 17 different ways, the whole thing could explode and take half a solar system with it. He also saw the solution, which was annoyingly obvious once you ignored what each species thought was the proper way to do things and focused on what actually needed to happen. Have you tried turning it off and on again? He asked. The silence that followed was profound enough that Jake could hear the ship's quantum engines humming 3 decks down. I beg your pardon? Queen Zarathil finally managed. You know, the classic troubleshooting technique. Turn it off, wait a few seconds, turn it back on. Clears out any weird resonance patterns, lets everything reset to baseline parameters. Forgemaster Darkin's expression suggested he was reconsidering his species' alliance with beings who considered this level of technical sophistication. The systems aren't malfunctioning, human. They're fundamentally incompatible. Are they, though? Jake moved closer to the display, pretending to study it with the focused attention of someone who was definitely not seeing 17 different engineering solutions. I mean, they're all trying to do the same basic thing, punch a hole in space-time and keep it stable long enough to travel through. Maybe the problem isn't that they're incompatible, maybe it's that you're trying to run them all at the same time. Seven made a sound like a questioning theorem, which Jake somehow understood as elaborate on this concept. Well, Jake said, warming to his theme, what if instead of running all 3 systems simultaneously, you sequenced them? Use the Dominion's energy manipulation to create the initial dimensional fold. Then engage the collective's exotic matter containment to stabilize the aperture. Then activate the Singer's navigation protocols to establish the endpoint coordinates. Sequential activation, Kethvar murmured. That's actually not completely ridiculous. Thanks for the ringing endorsement, Jake said. But here's the thing, you'd need some kind of master control system to handle the timing. Each phase would need to hand off to the next at exactly the right moment, with microsecond precision. Queen Zarathil's ears perked up. And I suppose you have a suggestion for such a system. Oh, I wouldn't know how to build something like that, Jake said quickly. I just fix things. But if I had to guess, I'd say you'd need something that could interface with all 3 technological paradigms simultaneously. Maybe some kind of hybrid approach that used a little bit from each system. He trailed off as he realized they were all staring at him again. A hybrid approach, Forgemaster Durkin repeated slowly, using elements from each system to create an interface that none of us could build individually. Theoretical possibility only, Jake backpedaled frantically. I'm sure it would be way too complicated for someone like me to actually implement. I mean, you'd need to understand quantum harmonics, exotic matter manipulation, and probability mathematics all at the same time. That's clearly beyond my abilities. Seven produced what Jake was learning to recognize as their version of laughter, a sound like mathematical certainty, dissolving into chaos and reforming as a new equation. However, Jake continued, unable to help himself, if someone were to try such a thing, they might start with a basic quantum state buffer to smooth the transitions between phases. Nothing fancy, just a simple probability wave function that could hold the system's state stable during handoffs. Simple probability wave function, Kethvar echoed. Of course. And you'd want to use resonance matching to synchronize the energy frequencies between the Dominion and collective systems. Jake went on, his hands moving as he talked. Basic harmonic theory, find the common denominators and build from there. Queen Zarathil was now watching him with undisguised fascination. These common denominators being, oh, you know, mathematical constants that show up in both dimensional folding and exotic matter equations. Pi, the golden ratio, Planck's constant, the usual suspects. Any first-year engineering student could spot them. First-year engineering student, Forgemaster Durkin muttered. Right. The really tricky part would be integrating the Singer's navigation protocols, Jake continued, completely forgetting to maintain his facade of incompetence. Their probability-based positioning system doesn't play well with deterministic approaches. But if you treated their calculations as quantum superposition states rather than discrete coordinates, you could probably use quantum entanglement to lock the endpoint location while maintaining navigational flexibility. He stopped talking when he noticed that Seven was now flickering much more rapidly, which he somehow knew meant they were excited. I mean, he added weakly, that's what I'd probably try if I knew anything about this stuff. Which I don't, obviously. Queen Zarathil exchanged glances with the other delegation leaders. Jake Reeves, she said formally, would you be willing to assist us in testing this simple integration approach? I couldn't possibly, Jake said quickly. I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, building a master control interface for 3 different alien technologies. That's way above my pay grade. The grand demonstration was scheduled for 800 Alliance Standard Time, which gave Jake exactly 6 hours to figure out how to orchestrate a technological breakthrough while maintaining his rapidly crumbling facade of incompetence. He stood in the Starweaver's Asterisk main engineering bay, surrounded by the finest minds from 3 different civilizations, all of whom were looking at him expectantly. Right, Jake said, rubbing his hands together nervously. So, where do we start? Forgemaster Durkin gestured to a massive assembly that looked like someone had crossed a particle accelerator with a pipe organ, and then fed it performance-enhancing drugs. The exotic matter containment matrix is ready for integration testing. Seven flickered beside a bank of probability processors that hurt Jake's eyes to look at directly. Their contribution sounded like mathematics having an existential crisis. But Jake somehow understood they were saying the navigation protocols were calibrated and ready. Queen Zarathil stood beside the Dominion's energy manipulation array, which resembled a crystalline flower that had achieved sentience and developed strong opinions about dimensional physics. Our systems are prepared as well. Great, Jake said with false enthusiasm. So we just connect everything together and hope it doesn't explode. The integration process is somewhat more complex than that, Kethvar observed dryly. He'd positioned himself near what Jake hoped was a blast shield, though with alien technology, it might have been a decorative wall hanging. Jake studied the 3 systems, his mind automatically calculating integration points, power flow requirements, and about 50 different ways to sequence the activation without creating a cascade failure that would turn them all into exotic particles. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, but implementing it would require him to essentially conduct an orchestra of incompatible technologies. Okay, he said finally. I'm going to need everyone to follow my lead here, and please don't ask me to explain my reasoning because I'm not entirely sure I have any. Inspiring confidence as always, Kethvar murmured. Jake approached the Dominion array first, pretending to study its crystalline matrix with the intense concentration of someone who definitely wasn't seeing the optimal resonance frequencies dancing in his head like visible light. Your Majesty, could you set the dimensional fold generator to? Let's call it gentle persuasion mode instead of violent reality restructuring. Gentle persuasion mode. Queen Zarathil's ears twitched with barely suppressed amusement. Is that a technical term? It's a Jake term, he replied. Trust me, we want to ease into this. Think of spacetime as a really expensive fabric that we're trying to tailor, not a cheap t-shirt we're planning to rip apart. He moved to the collective's setup next, where Forgemaster Durkin was monitoring readings that would have made a nuclear physicist weep with envy. Forgemaster, I need you to think of your containment matrix less like a cage and more like a comfortable waiting room. We want the exotic matter to feel welcome, not trapped. Exotic matter doesn't have feelings, Durkin rumbled. How do you know? Have you ever asked it politely to behave instead of just forcing it into compliance? The Forger Master's expression suggested he was reconsidering several fundamental assumptions about physics and possibly existence itself. Seven's station was the trickiest, partly because their probability processors existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, and partly because Jake had to translate his instructions into mathematical concepts that didn't quite exist in normal space. 7, I need you to set your navigation protocols to optimistic uncertainty rather than aggressive precision. We want to arrive where we're going, but we want to leave room for the universe to make helpful suggestions. The Void Singer's response sounded like a quantum equation learning to laugh, which Jake took as agreement. Now, Jake continued, moving to the central control console that he'd jury-rigged from spare parts and what he was pretty sure was a coffee machine. The key to making this work is timing. We're going to bring each system online in sequence, let them get comfortable with each other, and then gradually increase the integration level until they're all working together like they were designed that way. And if something goes wrong, Kethvar asked, then we'll have the most spectacular failure in recorded history, Jake replied cheerfully. But hey, at least it'll make a great story. He activated the first sequence, and the Dominion array began to hum with harmonics that made the air taste like starlight. The dimensional fold generator came online gradually, reality bending in ways that were theoretically impossible, but practically quite reasonable once you got used to the idea. Okay, that's looking good, Jake said, monitoring readings he pretended to be guessing about. Forgemaster, bring your containment matrix online, now. The collective's exotic matter system engaged with a sound like controlled thunder. For a moment, Jake held his breath as the two incompatible technologies met for the first time. Then the frequencies began to synchronize, the Dominion's energy patterns adapting to complement the collective's material science in ways that no textbook had ever described. 7, you're up, Jake called out. Navigation protocols nice and easy. The Void Singer's probability processors came online with mathematical precision that somehow felt musical. Jake watched his improvised control system as it began translating between 3 completely different approaches to bending the laws of physics, each one learning to work with the others in real time. It's working, Queen Zarathel breathed, her ears practically vibrating with excitement. Don't jinx it, Jake muttered, making minute adjustments to the integration protocols. The system was stabilizing beautifully, all 3 technologies finding their rhythm together like musicians who had been waiting their whole lives to play this particular song. The wormhole aperture formed gradually, a shimmering disk of possibility hanging in space like a doorway to everywhere. It was stable, it was controlled, and it was definitely not supposed to exist according to everything Jake had learned about physics before he'd started ignoring the textbooks and fixing things through applied stubbornness. Full integration achieved, Jake announced, then added quietly, and only minor violations of causality. That's practically a miracle. The celebration that followed involved 3 different species, trying to express joy in ways that were compatible with each other's biology, and mostly succeeding. Forgemaster Durkin actually smiled, which was terrifying. 7 began flickering in patterns that Jake somehow knew represented mathematical poetry about the beauty of unified engineering principles. Queen Zarathel approached Jake as the others examined the stable wormhole with expressions of wonder and disbelief. Jake Reeves, she said formally, by the authority vested in me as Queen of the Ethereal Dominion, and with the agreement of our allied powers, I hereby establish the Quadruple Alliance and name you Chief Technological Advisor. Oh no, Jake said automatically. Your Majesty, I really don't think I'm qualified for that kind of responsibility. I mean, Chief Technological Advisor sounds like someone who knows what they're doing. As opposed to someone who just revolutionized interstellar travel by asking exotic matter to please behave nicely. Jake opened his mouth to deflect, then stopped. He looked around the engineering bay at the stable wormhole, at the 3 alien species who were already discussing joint research projects, at the future that was opening up like a flower made of starlight and possibility. You know, he said finally, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about knowing my true abilities from the beginning. Queen Zarathel's smile was radiant. Have you indeed? I mean, it was pretty obvious, wasn't it? The whole humble maintenance tech thing got a bit ridiculous after the first few impossible repairs. Just a bit, Kethvar agreed. Around the time you started explaining quantum harmonics while insisting you were just following your intuition. Jake laughed, and for the first time in years, it felt completely genuine. Okay, fine, you got me. I may have been slightly understating my technical qualifications. Slightly, the Queen repeated with amusement. But I want it on record that I still prefer percussive maintenance as a troubleshooting methodology, Jake continued. And if I'm going to be Chief Technological Advisor to the Quadruple Alliance, I want to keep my maintenance coveralls as my official uniform. Done, Queen Zarathil said without hesitation. And I want it officially noted that my primary qualification is being really good at making things work. That, she said, is precisely why you're perfect for the job. 6 months later, Jake stood in the Alliance Council chamber, wearing his grease-stained coveralls and explaining faster-than-light communication theory to a room full of beings who represented the most advanced civilizations in known space. His presentation involved several hand-drawn diagrams, at least one analogy comparing quantum entanglement to a really good friendship, and a demonstration using what appeared to be a modified kitchen timer. So you see, he was saying, if you think of subspace as a really big pond and quantum particles as really small ducks, then instantaneous communication is just a matter of teaching the ducks to swim in formation across the pond while maintaining quantum coherence. It's not complicated once you stop overthinking it. The assembled delegates hung on his every word, even though half of them were pretty sure he was making up the terminology as he went along. From the back of the chamber, Queen Zarathil and Kethvar watched with expressions of fond exasperation. Do you ever regret conscripting him? Kethvar asked quietly. Every time he explains advanced physics using waterfowl metaphors, she replied. But then he casually solves problems that have stumped our greatest minds for centuries, and I remember why he's exactly what the Alliance needed. On stage, Jake had moved on to